Hey, folks, welcome. We'll get officially kicked off here in a moment with today's live podcast of the Concealed Carry Podcast. This being episode 382, if you can believe it. It's a lot of episodes, Jacob.
Mm-hmm. That is a lot of episodes.
Yeah. You've been right there with me from the beginning.
No, you're in the most of them, right?
Yeah, but you've been there with me from the beginning.
Sure. Okay.
Matthew, he's the newbie, but he's still been around for a while.
He was in episode 18 in his defense.
Was I?
Yeah.
Wow, that was pretty old.
To chamber or not to chamber, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
By the way, folks that are on, like, if you're using any of the podcast apps, you can't even find that episode anymore. You have to go to our website.
I think it drops off the older ones, right?
Yeah, like iTunes only shows the 300 most recent episodes or something.
Something like that.
Yeah, we should say that when the recording, by the way. Someone emailed us.
I will. I'll say that. I will make sure to mention it for our audio folks. So we got some comments rolling in. Hello, Will and Gary. Welcome. Thanks for joining today. So, again, we'll get started here in just a second. Today we're going to be talking about the West Freeway Church of Christ shooting, like 3 weeks ago now?
Yeah.
Something like that. 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So we're finally getting around to breaking that down, analyzing it, discussing on the podcast, mostly because I know that our listeners, and I've had some people actually message me or ask in other episodes, in comments and whatnot, like, you guys are going to talk about that, right? Yes, we're going to talk about it. But we gave it some time. We gave it some breathing room. And so here we are. Now we're talking about it. Cool. Hello, Jerry Apodaca. Apple Fire. Love that guy. And M. Vin, whoever that is on YouTube. Gary and this weird Matthew guy. I don't know. I swear he's stalking me. He's in every episode here.
Yeah, he's a weird guy, I heard. Very strange.
Okay. Well, I think viewership's a little bit low today, but let's get it started anyway. So,
cool.
I'm sure people are just waiting to join. All right. In 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode number 382. And welcome to Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network. I am your host, Riley Bowman, joined today by my longtime co-hosts, Jacob Paulson and Matthew Marister.
Hello.
Hey, it's true.
Yeah, it is true. 382 episodes. It's actually, this basically at this point marks, Jacob, about 4 years. I think we're a little bit under 4 years since we started the podcast.
Yeah, February 2016, yeah.
It's like the first week of February, if I recall correctly, like literally just after SHOT Show. So pretty crazy, That's a long time to still be doing the show. There's a lot of shows that don't last that long. There's a lot of TV shows that don't last that long.
Very true.
Including some good ones that, they're always those ones that you're like, oh, it's such a cool show. Oh, it didn't get picked up for a second season. Dang it. I just wasted like a year of my life. And some of you have wasted 4 years of your life listening to us. No, hopefully that's not the case. You keep coming back because I'd like to think that we have something worthwhile and valuable to share on the podcast. Apparently, I got to mute a tab over here. But anyway, hey, real quick, Jacob wanted me to make sure to mention this for the audio podcast listeners that, if you haven't looked at it in a while, or if you're just discovering the podcast, particularly if you're using some of the apps like Apple Podcasts, I'm going to actually look there right now and see what the earliest episode is that you can find. But you cannot find the earliest episodes of the Concealed Carry Podcast in the Apple Podcasts app. And I suspect that's true of a number of the podcast apps out there, because I think a lot of them almost just mirror what Apple puts out there. So right now I can go back to episode 41. That's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's set up 300 or 350. It's some arbitrary number of most recent episodes you can access.
Yeah. Well, 41, 381. 381 is our most recent published episode, I think. Minus 41, it's like, 340 episodes. Kind of weird number, but that's the truth. So if you want to get our earliest episodes of the podcast that exist, best place is probably just to go to our website. You can go right to podcast.concealedcarry.com, and you can find all the podcasts right there, all episodes. So I know that's going to come up for some of you that are like, hey, where do I find the earliest episodes? Well, go to the website. You can find them. Not that hard. Not as convenient maybe as Apple Podcasts for some of you guys or Google Play, but that's the deal. Today's episode is brought to you by LaserX. LaserX is the software I think to use for laser integrated dry fire training. Jacob and I have been using some version of the Laser app software for several years now. And I just love it. I don't ever get tired of using it. And it's actually, I use it more now than I was there for a while because the newest version, LaserX, works with my iPad, works with my iPhone, works with my MacBook, works with my Windows-based computer because it's a web app, which is cool. I think it's genius. And it works surprisingly really well. So use it with a SIRT pistol, use it with a laser cartridge in a live fire gun, that you've made safe and loaded that laser cartridge in. Use it however you want, but get very valuable dry fire practice with LaserX. And you can sign up and learn more at Laser App. By the way, that's LASRAPP.com. Anything else you want to add, Jacob?
It's sad that they had to finally bow their heads to all you Mac people out there. I don't know what the problem was. Windows seems fine, but I am grateful to be able to use it for my phone. So yes, you can learn more and get it and awesome stuff. And I would also encourage you, if you're already a user of Laser, or if you're not, but you're considering it, go to shooterreadychallenge.com and check out the monthly dry fire drills that are posted there. And I think you will get a lot of value from that.
Yep. Shooterreadychallenge.com. In fact, we just talked about that last episode. So go check it out. Also wanted to mention, not necessarily a sponsor spot here, but we wanted to make you aware that the concealedcarry.com YouTube channel, well, our videos are now on gunstreamer.com. Gunstreamer.com, a more gun-friendly, in fact, very, 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 the most gun-friendly you could be version of YouTube out there on the interweb. So gunstreamer.com, you can find our new Concealed Carry channel on there. Super excited about that. Even these episodes, they don't go out on Gunstreamer live, but like an hour or two later, they should be right up there. So pretty excited to be on Gunstreamer finally.
Yeah, make it happen.
Yeah, so go to gunstreamer.com, search for the Concealed Carry channel, and subscribe. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, all right? It shouldn't take that much effort for concealedcarry.com to be up there in some of the top channels on Gunstreamer. So if you guys want to see us up there, well, go hit that subscribe button. And so, again, today's episode, well, we kind of mentioned in a preview before we went live that today we are actually talking about breaking down, analyzing the West Freeway Church of Christ shooting that happened a few weeks ago in White Settlement, Texas. And yeah, traumatic event. Many of you, if not all of you, are at least in some fashion familiar with what took place. Dang near everybody knows Jack Wilson's name by now. The hero of that day. So, we gave it some time, some room to sort of breathe and let things sort out and settle down. And now we've decided that we're going to talk about that and talk about some lessons learned. And I think that's the important thing, right? So I'm going to start off, guys, with a caveat that nothing that we talk about today is intended or should be taken as any criticism or picking on anybody that was involved in this regrettable event that happened on that day. All right, so it's, if we say something, well, this person might have done this, or they could have done this, or maybe this might have been something that could have been done differently, whatever it is, this is meant as a lessons learned. This is meant as a, what can we take from this? And yes, call it Monday morning armchair quarterbacking, whatever, but that's a part of learning and looking at experiences like this and then asking ourselves, what can we do? All right, that's the important thing, is that we look inward and not place any blame on people that were involved in that incident. So there's the caveat. Now I release you, brethren. Who's going to take the first bite out of a pretty, like, again, there's a lot here. There's a lot to talk about.
So perhaps maybe a good way to do this is to spend it'll take probably 3 to 5 minutes for me to kind of go through what happened, roughly summarize the actions, and then we can kind of get into some analysis.
Yeah, and I got the video queued up, which I think is worthwhile. YouTube was working really hard to keep that from being out there, which, I mean, when it's something like this was aired live. Let's be, like, that's the thing here. This was aired live. It was, I think, on YouTube.
Church service was being aired live. Yeah.
So when this shooting happened, I mean, there's people worshiping from home that saw this happen live, which is kind of, that's really sad to think about, honestly. What a shocker, right? And then the video was, being taken down, repeatedly. It's now more out there, and big channels like John Correa's Act of Self-Protection, he did quite a nice analysis of it as well, and it's out there in that form. But I have it here. I have it prepped. Jacob, if you want to walk us through this, I might have a little more detail to interject, as I've done some very, like, painstaking, not actually wasn't that difficult, but I've done kind of some frame by frame analysis, mostly from.
Well, I don't know if I want to do this if I'm just going to get interrupted by you the whole time. That doesn't sound very fun.
No, I'm going to let you take the lead, but I might come back and point out some, like, time stamps, if you will.
Okay.
Like, yeah. So go ahead.
So basically, what you have here is you have a congregation of peeps. I think from the video you can count about 142 people, but I think later law enforcement said there were over 200 people there. It looks like predominantly older senior citizen type people, and at least 10 kids that you can see from the video that are in the room. So that's kind of where we start. Now from kind of hit play on video, about 2 seconds in, the shooter stands up. By shooter I mean the bad guy. Okay, the bad guy stands up and approaches an usher that's kind of standing in the back of the room. And at that point, you can clearly see two of the church security team people really kind of watching the BG's behavior, just keeping an eye on and looking. Kind of a conversation ensues between an usher and our BG. And about 12 seconds in, the usher kind of points toward the back doors in response to an unknown question, right? Like they're asking, maybe he's like, where's the bathroom? I don't know. But the usher points and says, that way kind of thing. And again, both security team members are clearly watching this person, which would make sense because this person is dressed very bizarrely. Trench coat, wig or mask, and just all sorts of awkwardness. Okay. So anyone in the room would be like, that's weird. What's up with that dude? Okay. Now, so that's where we're at. About the same time, the usher points toward the back doors. At the same time, the seated security team member who's been watching this whole time kind of gestures for the shooter to follow him, sort of like, oh, you're looking for the bathroom? Like, come with me. I'll show you where the bathroom is, right? Like, I will escort you to the bathroom. 1 second later, 13 seconds in, the shooter pulls out a shotgun that was concealed in his clothes, okay, in his coat or whatever, and points it at the usher. Now, at this point, well, we don't know if this is an active shooter event. Like, if I'd been sitting in the congregation, it could be an armed robbery. Maybe it's like, hey, you guys got any money? I don't know. But at this point, shotgun's just being pointed. Okay, so you see at this point, the security team member who is seated and was previously kind of waving like, "Hey, I'll escort you." That person starts to stand. At 14 seconds, you can see they're almost fully standing, and they're reaching for their gun. 1 second later, at 16 seconds, they've fully drawn the firearm, but it's not at the ready position. It's not pointed on target. They just they got this jacket out of the way, got my gun, and it's coming out. Okay, but in the process of drawing this gun, the BG kind of sees this movement, no doubt, out of the corner of his eye, sees that we got a good guy over here reaching for a gun or something, or maybe he sees the gun even, and he just turns that shotgun, a very minor angle necessary, away from the usher toward the security team member and fires. Okay, and that's the first shot fired. And at the same time, you can see our second security team member, who's Jack Wilson, who's standing kind of further back of the room. He's drawing his gun. You can see he's got about 3 o'clock. He's got his like sweater or overshirt, kind of pulled out of the way, and he's going for his gun. So as the shotgun is still recoiling, I mean, you can see we're at 17 seconds in. First shot's been fired. It was fired at 16 seconds. So at 17 seconds in, you can see all this has happened. Our shooter is losing grip of his gun. Clearly he's not an expert shotgun shooter because, the recoil is enough for him to kind of stumble and lose his gun a little bit. And things are not good. So at this point, an interesting thing that's worth pointing out is the people in the congregation have no idea. A shot's been fired, and very few of them have even like turned. I mean, maybe half of them are kind of glancing toward that direction. It's only 1 second later. Like our reaction time to that kind of thing is slower than we'd think. Okay, so that's no one is standing at this point. Like not a single person has stood up to run away. Okay, now at 18 seconds in, now we're 2 seconds from the first shot fired. Okay, our second security member, Jack Wilson, he's got his gun out. It's almost in the ready position. He's ready to present a target. But at this point, our shooter, our BG, has turned his shotgun back toward that initial usher and fired his second shot. So first shot fired at 16 seconds in, second shot fired at 18 seconds in on this video. So not a lot of time between those two shots.
That second shot, sorry, I am going to interrupt. It occurs right about this point, and you can see that Jack Wilson still at this point just has his hand on the gun in his holster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's cleared the holster at this point, but I don't think he's come to present a target at all. But you do start to see more reaction from the congregation now. We're 2 seconds from the first shot. The second shot's just been fired. You see the pastor up at the front. He's starting to get low to the ground. You see a lot of people looking. You see a couple people with hands over ears, right? Loud noise. Heads are turned. But still, at this point, not a single person has stood up. So it's still pretty fresh in terms of reaction time and what's going on. At 19 seconds in, 3 seconds since the first shot, okay, our shooter is turning toward the pastor with his shotgun, and our good guy, our Jack Wilson guy, he's about presented to target. I mean, he's pushing gun out and looks like he's about to take his shot at this point. So that's 3 seconds from the initial shot being fired. That's pretty good. And at this point, again, you see more reaction from the audience. Most people are laying down or ducking in their pews. Okay, the pastor is almost fully prostrate on the ground. He's about to take a shot toward him. At this point, the shooter takes a step toward the pastor, toward the front of the church. Okay, and our security team member Jack Wilson fires a single shot over. All these people are sitting in their pews, and maybe over one person who's semi-standing up at this point. Kind of hard to tell from the angle of fire. And this shot from Jack Wilson shoots our bad guy, our BG, in the head. Okay, as he gets shot, his finger does press the trigger again on that shotgun, causing one final third shot to be fired toward the pastor on the stage. But this shot does not impact anybody. No injuries from this third shot fired. That's now the action's over. The shooting is done. Okay, we're 20 seconds in, 4 seconds since the first shot was fired, and we're done. No more shots are being fired. Most of the people now in the congregation are on the ground. That's the most I didn't see anybody like get up and run. Maybe a couple people are standing, but for the most part, everyone's just hit the ground. They're down off their pew, going under a bench.
A couple in the back here that are
they're standing. Maybe they're gonna run.
They're starting to go.
Sure.
Yep.
The pastor is completely prostrate on the ground. I mean, he's completely out of the way. Okay, and now we see the security team member Jack Wilson. He starts to move toward his threat. He's verifying the threat is down, and right about 27 seconds in, 11 seconds from the first shot, we see some additional men getting up now to see what's going on. By 30 seconds in, which is 14 seconds from the first shot, 11 seconds from the good guy's shot, we have 4 total armed security members with guns out moving toward our downed BG. Yeah. Within another 6 seconds, and you have now a total of 5 armed people moving in on the BG. So that kind of is the rough summary of the action. That's what happened.
Yep.
Based on the video.
Yep. Yeah, you got it. It's a pretty good summary, Jacob. So I went through and did a frame-by-frame analysis, meaning really what I did is I basically, this video we're viewing right here on the screen is in 30 frames per second. So it makes it pretty easy to do some math and get pretty accurate timestamps as far as there's obviously other things I could do to get actual timestamps on the screen, that sort of thing, but I just counted frames. And so from your times are pretty close to spot on, but I was just going to back up here and kind of walk you through it real quick here. So we see in the back the suspect, the perpetrator of this crime, is still talking to that usher there, and right about there, you see that little movement, right in front of his jacket there. That little arm shoots out. Somehow he has that it's a pistol grip pump action. Well, I think it's pump action. The shots actually are pretty fast, and considering that the shotgun recoiled like it did out of his support hand, maybe it was semi-automatic. I don't know, but I believe it was probably pump action. I don't know. So anyway, you see that hand flash right there, and that's when he's basically this is when the perpetrator is beginning his draw. It's right there. And from that, it's 15 frames, which is half a second, till he gets the shotgun out of his pants or coat, and then it's about a second before he gets it up to where it's actually aimed at somebody. At 36 frames in, it's 1.2 seconds. That's when we see our first security guard begin to actually stand. So from the time that the bad guy began his shotgun draw, it's about 1.2 seconds till he starts to stand. And he doesn't begin drawing until he really starts standing. You see his hands start to sweep back this way. And I've watched this quite a few times, and judging by the angle of his elbow and his shoulder, and I hate to get into the weeds too much on this, but I'm pretty confident that he's coming from small to back, holster-wise, right? And I think, Jacob, it's probably that dreaded palm out that you don't care for, because that's what you end up with, that chicken wing, when you turn your hand that angle to get that palm out draw on a small back holster.
Don't get me started.
Again, nothing here is meant to be a criticism. This is just pointing out, the facts as we see them. And of course, I mean, not everything here is probably exact or perfect, but that's what I believe based on just, I've seen this movement many, many, many times. At 1.8 seconds, okay, 1.8 seconds is actually when we actually see a little bit of movement from Jack Wilson, and we see movement from our first security guy. Okay, it's 1.8 seconds in from the beginning of the shotgun draw that we see them both actually begin to draw. So they actually started both drawing at the same time. And then we see that it's at 4.1 seconds in that the first shot is fired from the beginning of the shotgun draw, which again, it took about a second or so for him to actually get the shotgun out. So we have about, and this is pretty in line with what John Correa put out in his own analysis, about 3.1 seconds that this first security guy had time to essentially do something or react. 3.1 seconds until that first shot was fired from the time the shotgun actually came out. All right. And then we see that shot. He begins to go down, and it's at, I wrote down here, it's small though, at 5.7 seconds is actually when Jack Wilson finally begins actually presenting the gun, his gun. All right. So there's quite a bit of time there, right? And I'm not trying to make too big a deal out of that. I'm just stating the facts. Like, we see about 3 seconds that it's taking the first guy to get to his gun and start drawing. We see the first shot, man goes down. Second shot, he starts going down. And then about 2 seconds after, not quite 2 seconds, a little less than 2 seconds after the second man is shot, that's when Jack Wilson's shot is fired right there. All right, so from when the man first moves to draw his shotgun to when Jack Wilson ends him is a total of 6.3 seconds. Which is both, it's an eternity, and in that time, two men are shot and ultimately die, but it's also incredibly fast how fast that all happens too. From like bad guy shooting people to good guy ending him. 6.3 seconds in an active, I mean, do we know all the intents this man was going to, what he was intending to do? No, not necessarily, but it certainly was looking like he was intending on killing more people.
Yeah.
And that's my belief. And so we had a situation that could have been far, far, far worse, ended very quickly.
Yeah,
Matthew's turn.
There were just a couple overhead, big things to take away as far as the time hacks and stuff that I did the same thing kind of that you did. But you talked about 6 seconds, roughly around 6 seconds. We have to back up before we even get to that point and say that the reason why the security guards were there in the first place, or the security team members were there in the first place, is they already identified this person as not somebody that they had ever seen at the church before. He was wearing a trench coat. He had a fake beard and a wig on. So there were indicators that this guy was there and had some sort of mental problem that was going on. And so they they had the one security guard sitting there close by, and then Jack Wilson, the one security guard that's actually ends up getting shot first. His name is Richard White, and so he was actually sitting to observe this guy, and Jack Wilson was off standing a little bit further back. But yeah, these guys, the security team recognized this. And Jack Wilson reacts quickly. He does his thing. But if Jack Wilson isn't there, the security guards aren't there, the security team isn't there. If you go through and you just have somebody in the congregation that is armed, that first person, I believe it takes about 59. We're like 14 or 15 seconds into the shooting before the first person is even able to start drawing their gun that isn't a security team member, right? So the importance of, I think that goes to the importance of having a security team at the church, because when you're at church, this person's trying to draw their gun in a crowd and get through the crowd to be able to put an effective shot on this guy, and they weren't able to. They wouldn't have been able to. So I think that's important to look at. I think, some of the big things that people were talking about as far as how many guns were actually drawn out. There were, if you count it and you go through, there's 7 people that ultimately end up pulling firearms, not counting the Richard who ends up getting shot when he's drawing his firearm. Right. So there's 7 people. And what ends up happening is they all end up converging on the bad guy. They get into a crossfire situation, and several of them, as they are moving throughout the church, it's apparent that they don't have a lot of firearms training, because they're muzzling the rest of the congregation. Now, like you said, Riley, we're not here to say, hey, you should have done this and nitpick, but if you are a member of a security team, there has to be coordination. There has to be some level of training, because that crossfire situation could end up, you mistake somebody else for an additional shooter, or law enforcement comes in and mistakes. And so I think we have to talk, later on about maybe some lessons learned if you're on a security team, or maybe if you're not even on a security team, but you carry in your church things that you can do, because there's a lot of things that went down here that we really need to clean up, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I'm going to just underscore that a little bit and add some other thought, because I think the biggest takeaways, as far as like what can the most of us learn from this incident and these videos, is this idea of an organized and trained response. And I don't know, maybe you guys know, or maybe other people watching this do know, how many people who had these guns, of these 7 people, how many of them are on the security team? How many of them are just random members of a congregation that happen to have a gun on them? I don't know. What I do know is that having a bunch of people armed in the congregation is better than having no one armed in the congregation, for sure. But an organized response is about 1 billion times more effective than an unorganized response. So, if I'm a person who's hearing about this news story, or I'm seeing this video and saying, oh my gosh, I'm gonna start carrying my gun at church, or I'm so glad I have my gun at church, or something like that, then I'm going to be, I think that you need to be asking yourself, well, am I part of an organized response or not? Because if there's already some sort of organized response in place, if there's already a security team, or an emergency response team, or whatever it might be, and I'm just some dude or dudette in the congregation with a gun in my pants or in my bag or whatever, then yes, you have a right to defend yourself. I am not in any way saying don't bring a gun to church. Like, more power to you. But if you want to be effective at not just defending yourself and the family and a couple of those people in the pew next to you, but you want to be part of the overall strategy of ending a threat, you need to participate in the organized response. You need to approach a member of a leadership person and say, hey, is there an organized security team in place? What does it look like for me to join that, participate in that, or at very least learn what they're doing? Maybe the team is full, they're not looking for more people, or maybe this church is only got X law enforcement people because there's so many cops running around with badges at this congregation, and I'm not. But at least finding out that something's in place, letting those people know I'm also armed, FYI, and I'm bringing my gun. And finding out, what are some of the procedures or practices that they have is going to go a long way. Now let's assume that you find out there's no organized response at all. I go to church and, hey, Mr. Leader dude, wondering if we have a security team or what have you. And, oh, no, we've talked about that, but my goodness, we've just never done it. I know a couple of people in the congregation have a gun, but we just, never really got to it. Now maybe there's an opportunity to have a bigger conversation about, I'd love to lead a committee on that, or I'd love to participate in a committee or be on that team. I think that we could do some things. But the point here, the takeaway is, it is extraordinarily more effective to have an organized response where people are trained together, have policies, procedures. And I'll add too, by the way, that me stuffing a gun in my pants to come to church does not prepare me for all emergencies, which are likely to take place in the church. It really, there's the odds of there being some other issue are much greater than there being an active shooter. So a security team does a lot of other things. We had, I'll give you two incidents that recently have happened on my security team in my congregation. One was a situation where we found a door that was basically roped, zip tied shut. And as it was a Sunday morning, I'm like, why is this door like this against fire code? What's going on? And I had some concerns about, I'm doing a security patrol in the middle of the meeting. It's like, holy crap, why would someone zip tie this door closed? Well, it turned out not to be a big deal. The lock had been broken earlier in the week, so someone zip tied it because otherwise the building would have been left unsecure. I had another one where a guy shows up at the building. He's out in the parking lot, and he's just not dressed like anybody who comes to the church, and no one recognizes him. I grab another person. We do a contact, right? One of us is the contact person. The other one is cover. And we just, hey, what's going on? Oh, I'm waiting for my ex-wife. She knows I'm meeting her. It's my turn to take the kids this week. And so as soon as the meeting's over, they're going to, it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, no. And it turned out to be completely innocent. Found the woman. Yep. Oh, yep. I knew he was waiting for me. I'm going to pass the kids off. It was fine. But the point is there's an abundance of things that are more likely to happen. So an organized response is the right response.
Of course. I'm still absolutely willing and happy to have those that are not part of an organized team or plan that are there also carrying, because you know what? They might be the last ditch, fallback resort option in some of these cases. But, you have to look at quite a contrast between this church shooting and the one in Sutherland Springs, right? As far as the way they went, the way they ended. Now they started very differently. Let's be clear about that. The Sutherland Springs one, he started actually shooting from outside the church and worked his way in. Was also likely carrying a lot more ammunition. I don't know what this guy had on him as far as the shotgun's concerned, but naturally that there's differences in those platforms. There's differences in how it was approached.
It's not apples to apples.
Right, yeah. Right. But this one started inside the congregation, inside the building, and during the meeting, this worship service, and so quite, what if Jack Wilson wasn't there, right? What if this church didn't really have much of a security team? Would there have been other armed civilians present? It seems likely, based on the video evidence that we're reviewing here. Would they have ultimately also been able to respond in an effective manner? I don't know. But I do think it would have been very different. I think that this church was fortunate that even the altercation itself, occurring where it occurred, was very fortunate, because it was kind of in the back corner of this sanctuary, and Jack Wilson was not very far from there. Right? It could have been in a more central part of this congregation. That could have changed things in a big, dramatic way as well. So, believe what you want to believe, but, maybe there was some divine intervention here. God's looking after these people. I mean, I believe that, but just as far as looking at why this played out the way it did, I don't know. we don't have all the answers to all that. But one thing I wanted to come back to here is, speaking of these other individuals that, whether they're part of a team or not, we see this man kind of in a red shirt, right? And he's, and I realize those of you that are audio only aren't seeing this, but I'm doing my best to describe it. But we have this man that comes down the aisle, the center aisle, he's got his gun out, and it's kind of in an awkward, sort of half compressed ready position, and it's just pointing straight towards where the threat was. And he comes right across this dude and that dude's head and Jack Wilson and all these people. Okay. We have another guy in a black. He comes back here, and you actually see he's doing pretty well with his muzzle awareness. He's actually got kind of a high ready position. It's extended, which is fine. It's, he lowers it a little bit here, but he gets back up. He gets back up there, so that's good. All right. There's a guy and the gentleman in the back who's now coming up behind Jack Wilson. It's hard to tell what's going on there, but he's doing a pretty good job. He's basically providing Jack some cover, if you will. So he's playing the role of cover officer. Jack's now going up, and he's making contact. And, it seems, I think at this point, it seems pretty apparent these guys realize that this dude is done. And so they approach, and the shotgun is removed, and end of story. Right about this point, we also see the man in red who muzzled everybody in the congregation tucks his gun under his arm rather than returning it to a holster, and so he can pull out his phone and start dialing 911. Now, I commend him absolutely for, now he's getting on the phone. Like, as far as we can see, there could be other people as well. There could be people hiding underneath the pews that are on the phone at this point already as well, or somebody in the back out of the range of the camera. But the red man's the first person we can see that actually is getting the phone out and placing that call. And that call is critical because that's when the clock starts ticking from when first responders are actually going to respond now. And that puts it into context, too, as far as how the reason why if we can't have an immediate response to prevent, stop, end a mass shooting, you can see the amount of time that passed between when the shot was fired and when this man starts to finally place the call. And it's about 30 seconds or close to it, right? Mm-hmm. In 30 seconds, you can shoot a lot of people, right? And then you still have the response time of law enforcement from that point forward. But I would say it's actually a pretty good job to get that call placed when he did. Now, as to why he's tucking the gun under his arm, I don't know. I agree that this person likely is not as highly trained as we would like. I hope that he's, and all the other people involved in the situation came away from this and going, there's a lot of things I could have done better and I could have done differently. But this is good for us to see and go, okay, where am I at currently in my current skill level and my current training knowledge? How would I have handled this? How would I have handled this under stress? Right? Yeah. These are all valid questions to answer. And a couple things, just based on my current analysis here is, number one, we have to be constantly muzzle aware, knowing where that muzzle is pointed. And I'll tell you, in a crowded situation like this, that muzzle up is probably the best way to be because you got people on the floor too. So muzzle up, a high ready, temple index even, I don't care. But somewhere in this relatively safe direction, the most safe direction that we can have based on the circumstances with a crowd of people like this. Muzzle direction. If you got to do something with your hands, go hands on. Put the gun away. Put it back in the holster. If you are carrying in a holster that doesn't allow you to easily reholster it, that's food for thought. Maybe you might consider a different way of carrying your gun so you can more easily reholster when it's time to do so and do so more safely. It's certainly preferred over tucking it under your arm and you're muzzling your arm, and as you turn it sideways to tuck under your arm, you're muzzling more people. It's just. So lots of lessons learned from these moments here in the aftermath.
Yeah, and I think it's important if you see how they all kind of converge on the bad guy. Oftentimes we think of tunnel vision as just like, okay, I'm excluding everything around me except this small thing. But somewhat of tunnel vision is also converging it and just focusing on one thing, and that's what every single one of these people did, and they focus on this one person, and it drew all their attention there, right? They were not focusing on anything else. And so if there were a second gunman, they're not going to be able, they're not in the correct frame of mind to be able to address that, right? So if you're not part of a security team, or your church doesn't have a security team and you have a firearm, and God forbid you're in a situation like this, be aware of what you're seeing in front of you. If you see 3 or 4 people with guns on a on a bad guy, you don't have to be the fifth and the sixth and the seventh guy or gal to point guns at a guy who's on the ground. Better to have the gun at the ready and be aware of other things that are going on and assess, maybe there's somebody coming into a different area, or is there somebody shot? Where can I go to be a help? I think, sometimes we want to help so much and we get focused in on one thing and we don't end up actually being as helpful as we could. There was one person I saw it from the time the first shot was fired. It was 11 seconds and somebody was going to the victims that were already shot. I thought that was really, I was impressed, because at that point, I don't believe that it was common knowledge that the shooter was down and completely not a threat anymore, or that there wasn't another shooter. Yet somebody went over there to start assessing the victims, and that was really commendable.
That's something I was going to touch on too. Not just that they did it, but this is a good food for thought item relative to having the right medical equipment. And knowing where it is. Does your building, does your church building have? And by the way, you can apply this to things other than churches.
Oh yeah.
Right. Any building where public converges. Right. So do you know where the first aid kit is in that building? Do you know what's in that first aid kit? Now, is it properly stocked and ready to go? And in this case, how much do you need? Do you need one tourniquet? Do you need 5? Do you need just a couple of rolls of gauze, or do you need like 20? So, having some good, foresight also relative to the first aid and those kinds of emergencies is really important. And without giving away too much as a teaser, our company is going to do something really big relative to medical stuff in February, and training and making that available so people can get educated. But that's a huge thing. So I'm glad you brought that up, Matthew. That was top of my mind too. I found out recently that the church building I go to doesn't have an AED. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, how do we not have an AED? And they're expensive. It's not a cheap little thing to just chuck in a first aid closet. But all the same, like, thinking about what do we have there? What is available to us? Is it properly stocked? Do I know where it is? Does everybody else, if I point at a random person in my congregation, say, go get the first aid kit, do they know where that is? Like, do they have any idea what I'm talking about? Are they going to look at me like, what first aid kit? So that would be a good thought.
Absolutely.
Another thing that I've been thinking about as we watch this, I didn't think about it until just now when we were discussing this, but you got 7 people with guns out, all pointing them in the direction of the BG, not pointing them at each other on purpose anyway. And I got to assume they must have recognized and knew each other, right? Otherwise, one would assume that, hey, that guy might be a second shooter. But that didn't happen. At no point did any of them think that any of the others of them were BGs, suggesting that they're all probably frequently attending members of this congregation. They recognize each other, may or may not have all been on some security team together, but at very least they like, oh, that's Bob, Mm-hmm. Yep, Bob's got his gun too. Got it. Like, over there's Billy. Oh, Billy's got a gun. So what does that mean? What's the point I'm trying to make? Mm-hmm. Well, a couple things. One is, if I'm in a congregation of a church or situation like this, there's great value to being familiar with all the people there, right? To knowing who's there, like being friends with and friendly with these people. If I'm new to a congregation, or heck, I'm visiting, me and Riley have done that before. We've been on business trips and go to some congregation, some church, you don't know anyone from anything and they don't know you either. That changes things. You might be very thoughtful about, if I'm an armed responder here and 6 other people pull out a gun and I'm a guest, I'm new here, they're just likely to see me as a stranger as the next guy, right? So we have other episodes where we discuss, how to minimize your risk of looking like a bad guy and all those kinds of things. But it's worth noting that, it seems obvious, but you might think to yourself, when I'm packing heat at church, will I recognize the other people who will come out with a gun, and will they recognize me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you were talking about, recognizing other people and kind of knowing, hey, this is where this person is, this is where this person's sitting and whatnot. Right. I think, and we talked about this at my security team talked about this a while back. And then Terry brought it up on the comment and said, so many things to take away. Very first thing I thought when I watched the first time was who's covering the pastor. And so, you know, it might be counterintuitive for a lot of people to say, hey, I'm going to the pastor, even if there's a shooting in the back of the room, because, you know, the senior pastor, that might be the person who's preaching, might be the one that's offended somebody, and they're the subject of the attack. So to understand, if you have a security team, is, you know, yes, I hear gunfire in the back. I look, I see Jack Wilson and Richard White and Tony Wallace over there, and they're handling it. I'm going to go to the pastor because I can no longer help over there. They don't need a fourth gun. The pastor needs help. So, you know, maybe certain things like that, or maybe, you know, your role is to move out into the hallway and go towards where the children's ministry is, or something like that, right? So I think knowing who is in your church that's armed, having designated roles, and you know, can really help calm those situations down where it just doesn't, you know, devolve into total chaos where people are running around and not really actually being beneficial to any of the problems, solving the problems.
Yeah. Yeah, good thoughts there. I agree. That was one thing I was looking at. I mean, kind of, you guys, we just went from like not shooting each other, recognizing each other, and talking about medical stuff. There's a lot there. Really valid points brought up. One thing I noted as well as some of these other gentlemen were coming in to the kind of the middle portion of the aisle there. You look at their body language, all right, and kind of like how they're handling themselves. You're like this guy in black. Okay, this guy here in particular, he doesn't look like an active shooter, right?
Mm-hmm.
His body language doesn't suggest that, right? You look at this other guy here towards the back. He's climbing over the pew. He's got his gun in a low ready position as he's tactically approaching. The guy in the red is the one that kind of, if anything, he would be the one that could be confused as a second shooter because of his mannerisms in pointing his gun at everybody, if that makes sense.
And skipping and hopping.
Yeah. So my point is, and this is why I've talked about it on the podcast before. I think body language is a huge part in nonverbal communication in a situation like this. Verbal communication, I think, is also really key. And granted, there's a lot of kind of screaming and yelling and stuff like that going on, and that's understandable. And to that point, it's probably a little bit more difficult to communicate with people when this is going on, right? But that nonverbal piece, as far as if you're using good tactics, good guy tactics, right, where you're being aware of your muzzle, you're keeping it oriented in a safe direction, at least where you don't have an active threat that you're addressing right in that moment, that's a good guy tactic. That's good body language that almost anybody viewing would be like, oh, that person, you know, they don't look threatening, right? They look like somebody that's covering, searching, trying to find the problem, trying to solve the problem, not the person that's creating the problem. You go back and you watch the bad guy here, you know, he very much pulls out his shotgun and it points where it points it at people he's intending on destroying here. And then he turns it towards the rest of the congregation. So very, very, he's very much an active threat, and the body language is very different. He is searching for, trying to find targets to shoot. And it seems that it does seem like he kind of goes right to that pastor next. Like he could have just started shooting people here in these pews right next to him. But so let's back up a little bit. There is some history here. The bad guy apparently had frequented this church before. Some people were aware of that fact, at least. Now, whether they recognized him on this particular day, because yes, again, he was wearing some kind of wig or hat and a beard, a fake beard, and clothing that's way out of place considering this is Texas in the cooler months. But look how everybody else is dressed. At the very most, they've got like a sweater vest or something. This guy's got heavy coat coming in, all black, beard, wig, hat, whatever, right? Very, very, very suspicious. Something isn't fitting right here. So let's back up. Let's talk real quick about some general, I think, security things. And I'm going to start with number one, intercepting things in the perimeter before we get totally infiltrated into the center of the congregation here. And
I don't want to interrupt you, but I sort of have something to say before we go there.
oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Because I think you're right. We do need to go there. But one other thing I think was just noteworthy is that our first good guy to draw his gun, who is one of our victims, he's not coming home, right? He's dead.
Right.
He was the first person shot, but he wouldn't have been the first person shot if he hadn't drawn his gun. Clearly our BG had the shotgun trained on the usher.
Right.
And in the moment that he sees that he whether it's the corner of his eye or he's looking right at it, he sees this other guy standing up, sweeping back a jacket, reaching for something, pulling it out. He changes his target. He goes from, I'm going to shoot this usher to, no, I'm going to shoot that dude first. And he does. He shoots him first. Then he comes back and still shoots the usher. So there is a very important, critical lesson here about telestrating.
Telestrating.
That's
a word?
not the right word.
Telegraphing?
Telegraphing. Thank you.
I like telestrating, though.
I was thinking of Telestrations. It's a great game my family and I love to play. So now I'm really tongue twisted. Telegraphing your movements. And is that what it's going to look like for you? And I suspect, based on my experience with our students out on the range, that the vast majority of American gun owners who are very committed to self-defense have never sat down and actually thought through what's it going to look like for me to draw from a seated position. Mm-hmm. If I decide to draw while seated and present versus if I'm going to draw while standing and present, my sense is that the majority of people have never thought through that, and practiced it and trained it. And this is a situation where, is it possible? I'm just going to throw this out there. And again, we are armchair quarterbacking, whether we like to call it that or not. And I just admit it and say it is what it is. And I do it only for the purpose of trying to make us all better for tomorrow. But is it possible that if that first security guy, if he had done a good job of drawing that firearm without telegraphing his movements, without even standing up, and just quickly drawn and presented and dropped that dude, could that have been the only shot fired? Mm-hmm. It could have been. It could have been because the BG did not fire his first shot. That first shot out of the shotgun did not come until he saw someone else drawing a gun. And after that shot fired, it was almost like, well, I'm committed now, right? Let's shoot this dude. Let's go shoot that dude.
Mm-hmm. No, and I'm glad you're bringing that up. I mean, that is part of my analysis of this whole thing. We haven't touched on that at a level of detail yet. I did touch on some of these things in Shop Talk just a couple days ago. This most recent Shop Talk, talking about drawing from a seated position, and kind of incorporated some lessons from this into that. And it's part of the inspiration why I wanted to talk about that in Shop Talk. Because you're exactly right that a surreptitious draw, things are very situationally dependent, of course, but a surreptitious or a concealed draw is oftentimes better than a really fast draw even. Right. In this case, this guy was neither concealed in his intent nor fast, and that's, I think, what cost. Like he basically, it could have gone one of three ways. One of those ways is the way it did go. Right, too slow, not concealing his intent. Another way it could have gone is a surreptitious draw, and he could have taken a little more time, perhaps even, and then dropped him. The alternative would be stand, but his draw could have been very fast, and he may still have been able to live to tell the tale, right? And so that's just these are like tools in the toolbox, so to speak, right? Like knowing and understanding this concept of, okay, do I have the opportunity here? And you should be asking yourself in any situation you might imagine yourself in with a gun, where you need to use a gun. Is this a situation where I can get away with a concealed draw, where I'm concealing the gun and the intent all the way through the draw until it's time to bring it out? And when you bring it out, you bring it out with full force. Or is this a time where, I can't get away with that. I don't have the time. I have to go, and I have to go now. In either case, I think you should have both skill sets. It's both things that you should be familiar with, and you should be tactically thinking about these things. And so, yes, in the man here that got shot first, it did not play well for him. Jack Wilson was more of a concealed draw, if you will, because I don't think he was even on the gunman's radar. He just didn't see him, wasn't aware of him. It appears that Jack was carrying openly, which is cool. I mean, in a church, no less. But
I don't think he was.
He doesn't have a jacket or anything on.
He has a sweater or a second layer, and you see it go from you go from seeing like undershirt, not seeing the undershirt, to that sweater or whatever coming up and seeing the undershirt.
Well,
I think it was from conceal. I could be wrong.
Either way, I mean, point is he had more time. He could take that time, and he was able to take the shot and not get himself shot in the process. But I will also point out that again, and this is nothing against our hero here, but from when he first moved and began to draw himself to when he finally shot was, let's see, it was more than 4 seconds. It was about 4.5 seconds. So even Jack himself took a lot. Now, some of that was he did get presented out, and he took about 1.5 to 2 seconds to, I think, follow the bad guy, line up those sights, take that shot. But it's entirely normal for average people, and I would still consider Jack to be average. Yes, he had some training. Yes, he owned a gun shop. Yes, he was an instructor, but I would still consider him a pretty average Joe. It's pretty normal, I think, for people to have that initial hesitation, that pause, that is this really happening? Is this really the action? I mean, like, I don't think Jack was expecting to have to draw and use his gun that day. And it, some people don't have any hesitation at all. Some people do, and it's completely normal, and it's okay. But I think it's important to be aware of and go, you know what? Okay, if I was in this situation, how would I handle it? Well, we may not always know all the answers to those questions, but at least in my mindset preparation that I find myself doing, I'm going through this kind of scenario all the time, this and others, of course, and thinking, okay, in that situation, this is how I have to react. This is how I have to respond. This is how it's got to go down. It's all part of prepping, I think, your mind ahead of time. Anyway, all right.
There was also a difficult shot. If Jack hesitated because he knew this is what's required for me to make this shot, then good on him for having that skill, right? Because there's the skill of being able to make the shot. There's also the skill of knowing what shots you can make and how.
Yes. And I know that he also said that there was some initial hesitation and you see it here actually in this view right here.
Yeah, he raises his muzzle.
That there's a couple of people, a woman and maybe another woman, kind of in between him and the bad guy, at least very close. A few frames before that, if I step it back, you can kind of see how this all plays out. There's even somebody back here that initially gets even lower. So he said there were some people kind of in the way, and that's totally understandable. But I'm focused a little bit more on there was a little bit of hesitation from his getting from his holster to getting into a presented out, stance to the target. So anyway, just some things I noted there. Now I know that, actually I forgot what I was going to say next. So I think Matthew, you had something.
Yeah, I'll just throw in one quick thing is, and this is just an observation, and you may not be armed. Your church may not let you be armed, right? But there were two gentlemen that were in that corner along with the shooter, right? So Tony and Richard, they had about 5 seconds from the time that the shooter exited the pew and walked over to him to kind of gauge this person and say, we already had an idea that this guy was a little bit off. And then that 5 seconds, has something changed? Are we picking up more that now he's becoming not just something's a little off, but definitely something he's giving signs that he's becoming aggressive or going to do something. They had about 5 seconds, which isn't a lot, but it's really important to try to pick up pre-assault indicators because as the one gentleman drew, right, Richard, Tony, if he, and I'm not saying that he's bad for not doing it, but if he would have gone towards the gun, the shooter, he had a long gun. So, you have two people, one's drawing a firearm, the other one could go hands on and try to, at least push that gun, the muzzle, the shotgun down or do something. It could have changed the outcome. And so don't give up or don't think that like just because I'm not armed I can't do anything. If he had the offering plate, maybe throws it at him. I mean, think of ways that you can be of assistance and don't give up because you don't have a firearm on you or think that you're, be aware, pick up on those pre-assault indicators, especially if you're part of a security team or you're unarmed and those types of things, because they had the force multiplier, right? They had 2 versus one guy in that corner. So.
Well, and even right here in this moment that I'm kind of I'm playing back and forth here on screen, this is where we see that it's just after our bad guy has taken the shotgun out, and he's within 1 to 2 steps of the usher that he initially made contact with, right? And his attention is now at this point turned towards our first security team member that goes to draw his gun, right? So that would be the time to act. But the reality is, not everybody's a warrior. Not everybody is prepared. Not everybody is in that mindset, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's important to realize as well, and ask, where are you? Anyway. Okay, so we were backing up a little bit, and I think we got to go back there now. Just real quick, talking about some general security things. First, if we could prevent this guy from getting into the congregation in the first place, that's the time to do it, right? Is to keep this from even getting to this situation in the first place. Now, the challenge is, and Matthew, by the way, had to duck out, folks. He's got to go, but Jacob and I will continue on here for just a little bit more. But churches, in particular, places of worship have this need, and I think it is a need, because a place of worship exists for, the brokenhearted, essentially, for people that have a desire to congregate, to worship their God, their Lord, whatever. And by nature, you need that to be a warm, inviting, welcome place. Right. And so I've seen a lot of comments the last couple of weeks about, well, they should have just had things really locked down tight on the outside. Well, if we have our churches look like prisons, then people probably don't want to go there. Right. So by nature of being a place of worship, it has to be warm. It has to be inviting. It has to be welcome. And, visitors welcome. It's on the signs of all of my churches, or, the churches in our area here. So, that's also a requirement, but then you also got to balance that with the security aspect. Now, could there have been something more done here? Who knows? We don't know. And we don't know all the details of what led up to this, in all the various, I suspect there was some contact that maybe took place. I don't know for a fact, but it seems to me, just because we have a couple of people are already on this side in this corner where this guy was, I think Jack Wilson was probably there because he probably took note of this guy and was like, I'm going to be kind of over this way, keeping an eye on this guy, right? So clearly there was something that they picked up on, and I think they were dialed in on. I would say this was, and I'll throw it over to you, Jacob. I would say that if police hadn't been called by this point, then they should have already probably been called. When you and I'll tell you what, working with our local agencies here, and we've been in some meetings with our local sheriff's office, local police departments. We've been in some security and faith trainings. In fact, I just attended one a few months ago where they've said, you know what, we'd rather you err on the side of caution. Call us if there's something out of place. Call if there's something weird. We'll come. We're here to support you, our churches. And I hope that's the attitude that all law enforcement has wherever you guys are.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. This is one of those things where it's really hard to really pass a lot of judgment, right? Mm-hmm. And every church is allowed to have its own policies and procedures about, allowing admittance to people into the building and deciding under what circumstances you're going to refuse admittance to someone. But I think most churches do err on the side of everyone's welcome. And it doesn't matter how they smell or how they're dressed or how they behave. We want everyone to come in, and only to, when they become aggressive or do something that we feel is inappropriate, do we take any action. And that's pretty normal. Now, a lot of people might say, well, this was a little bit extreme, right? I mean, this guy's in a trench coat. It's pretty hard to conceal a shotgun unless you got some pretty baggy stuff going on. He's got a wig and a fake beard. Like, I haven't seen any close-up pictures, but that's generally the kind of thing that you'd notice. At least a fake beard, you'd be like, that's super bizarre, So, mm-hmm. So yeah, as far as like refusing this person admittance, I'm sort of on the end of, hey, if he's allowed in, I don't see any security issue with that at all at a church. If he's not allowed in, that's fine too. Like whatever that policy procedure is that is followed by the leader of that building, church, congregation, whatever, that's in their hands and that's up to them. And I wouldn't draw any judgment on that at all. But mm-hmm. to your point, saying, okay, this one crosses a line relative to potential risk. So I'm going to go ahead and call cops now. You have very little to lose.
Yep.
I think that's the thing we got to
That's my
remember is,
point.
yeah, we always err on the side of, I don't want to be the hassle. I don't want to be the nag. I don't want to be the guy who cries wolf, and so we tend to not act. We err on the side of not doing things. We're creatures of comfort and we don't want to stand out and do, but this, yeah, I think that this is one of those situations where, hey, if the policy was let everyone in, all visitors welcome, that you still might say, yeah, but this crosses a line on the bizarre side. We're going to go ahead and call police, and we're going to designate someone to meet them at the door and explain the situation and say, hey, he's still just he's acting a little strange maybe, but we haven't seen anything crazy happen yet. I think that would be appropriate and fine.
Yep. I think this is good for churches and places of worship to consider, and that is develop a relationship with your local law enforcement, make them aware of you, invite them to barbecues and dinners and things like that, and make them aware of your own, and that's actually what we have going on here locally, where I'm at, is we're actually pretty well integrated with particularly our sheriff's office, and they're aware of our practices and how we operate, and they're keeping an eye out for us as well. I just kind of wonder, like, what about this? What about this? Consider this, particularly if you are involved in a church, wherever you viewing or listening are. Imagine if you had a relationship where you could, in a situation like this, you're like, boy, there just is something off about this guy. Like, it may be nothing. He may just be weird. He may just be a little bit whacked out. And guess what? He still needs the gospel like all the rest of us need the gospel. But, there's just something off. And you're able to place a call, maybe even to the non-emergency line. Like, you just have a number, you just call and say, hey, you know what? Can you come and just, either sit in our parking lot or maybe even have it. Can you imagine if an officer just came in and just stood in the back of the room? That might have actually completely changed everything about this situation. Where if that guy took notice of the cop, like, oh boy, maybe this is not the place to target today.
Or he might have shot the cop first, who's got armor, and he might have come away with some bruises and stuff. So yeah, we don't know, right? Yeah.
My point is like, just I think that we should be well integrating our communities, and police is a part of our community. It should be. So something to consider. You touched on it, Jacob, talking about behavioral cues, suspicious behaviors, picking up on stuff like that. Matthew mentioned earlier, pre-attack indicators. These are things that, and if your security team isn't practicing or preparing or training on these sorts of things, then you should be doing that, and you should be learning what these sorts of behaviors might be like, or what to look for. And then also you should be taking note of those things. I'll tell you, I've had a couple of times some interesting characters come into my own congregation, and I'll tell you, my spidey sense is dialed in, and I'm watching them like a hawk, right? It's never been in a situation where it's like, yeah, that person's going to do something violent, in the next minute. It's just, you're a little bit weird, or there's something about you, and I keep my eye on you. And so, I think that's totally an appropriate response, and we shouldn't let our guard down. We can still be warm and inviting. Our own strategy with our ushers, our security ushers at church, is that they are our front line of defense, both in terms of they are welcoming everybody, they're shaking hands, they are smiling at them and saying, how are you today? Welcome. Thanks for coming and worshiping with us today. At the same time, they're also evaluating them and going, is this person someone I'm going to be keeping an eye on? So I think that's just the way it's got to go in today's world.
And generally, if you have someone who's acting suspiciously, et cetera, as I think they did in this case, sort of, kind of, at least in this church, is you also approximate yourself to that person. You start to take some strategic posturing. You maybe assign an usher or somebody to go sit next to them and say, hey, don't recognize you. Are you new here? How can I help you? You take some proactive measures to maximize your odds of success should something happen. And so I think all that's appropriate.
Yep. Real quick, just an overview of pre-attack indicators. I have a list here from a training I attended a while back, and this is just a really good summary of some things to watch for. Assuming a boxer's stance. Invading personal space. We see that absolutely in this Texas church shooting, where when he goes to talk to that usher, like, you could see the way he's leaning into him. Like, you could tell something's coming because of the body language. clenching their hands, making fists, like even when they're down at the side and they just start clenching. Okay, making verbal threats, looking around the area. Okay, like just really looking. Now that one you have to be kind of careful with, because if you watch me, particularly in public environments, I'm always like looking around. It's just I'm just wired that way. And this is an interesting one. And if you definitely are familiar with John Correa's Active Self-Protection channel, you'll see this in a number of his videos where someone begins head or neck rolls or stretches, like the kind of like, particularly before physical altercations, like before fists start flying, they'll start kind of, and I don't know what it is. I think subconsciously you're just the fighter sitting there thinking, okay, I'm going to get myself loose, get myself ready, and wham, here it comes. Tenses the jaw muscles, looking really tense. So those are some pre-attack indicators. There's more, but those are probably some of the big ones. And just I wanted to throw that out there. Maybe somebody listening here today goes, "Oh yeah, that's a good point. Like I'll watch for that." And maybe something we share today is something that helps prevent something in the future. You never know.
Yeah. One last thing that I think we have to address, unless we already addressed it, but I think we got to talk about the headshot.
Yeah.
We definitely did touch on just this idea of, knowing what's required to make a shot, and Jack Wilson, perhaps having the ability to say, okay, at this distance, that size of target, this is what's going to be required for me to hit that, with this gun and stuff, and knowing that. But there's also just, I think a couple of things. One, I mean, if we're doing analysis, then we have to accept that based on the statements from him, he hit what he was aiming at. Now that might have been the shot he had, so I think we could all say, well, you should have shot for center mass, and maybe he didn't have the shot at center mass. We saw that maybe people were in the way or whatever, and that was the shot he had, and that was the shot he took. But I think more importantly, we have to say to ourselves, there are going to be situations in life where you may be faced with a deadly threat, and your target is small. Your target is small. It's the traditional hostage taker target or whatever situation it might be. And you need to be capable of making that shot and knowing what's required to make that shot. So I just wanted to come back to that and get that off my chest, that what decision Jack made, and whether he was skilled or lucky, like all that aside, for you who's listening or watching this, ask yourself, can I make those tough shots? And do I know what's required? Do I know how slow how much time I got to take? Do I know what kind of sight picture I have to have? And do I know I can do it?
Yep.
And knowing where you're at is step one. Working on improving where you're at is step two.
Yep. This is something I've thought about a fair amount. As I've attended church meetings as well, thinking about, you got kind of this wide open space, and and I'll say this much about church security teams, particularly if a church endorses and trains or puts in place an armed security team. They need to make sure their people are getting training and training opportunities. And that's a tough one because budgets can be tight. And plus these people are usually volunteers, which means, they got to make time also to get that training as well. But I think it's important because where people might be somewhat justified in saying, well, in most civilian contexts, I'm likely to need to use my gun in situations for threats 7 yards and less. And a lot of them, 3 to 5 yards. That's true for a significant number of violent encounters. But when you put yourself into a public environment like a place of worship like this, you might have a long shot or a difficult shot to make. You might have other people in the way. One thing to note, did you notice how everybody, once the first shot went, it's about a quarter second to a half second, which is normal human reaction time. People all of a sudden ducked, and many people just started getting right down right away. I know that this is something that's often put out there by the anti-gunners, like, well, we can't have a bunch of people hauling guns around like in public places. Like, people will be going crazy and running all over the place, and then you're shooting a bunch of innocent people. The reality is, I think human nature is, you hear a threat like that, you tend, especially where you're already seated and you have pews and you kind of sense that those protect you somewhat. Like, I think what we see in that video when everyone just sort of ducks and freezes and drops down is pretty natural human reaction. I don't think there's a lot of, like, no offense, old folks in there.
Well, I've said this before too, but you'd be statistically the odds of you recognizing it as gunfire at first are also very limited. So even when the reaction does process, you say, just heard loud bang. Yes, I acknowledge it. Looking to see what it is. Most people do not immediately recognize it as, oh, that's gunfire. I just heard a gun.
Yeah.
So you not only have to process that you heard something, but then you have to kind of look and say, holy crap, what was it? Oh, there's a shotgun with that dude's hand. It was a gun.
Yep. And you do see those reactions too. If you watch again and again and again, you'll see some people that just straight up they just drop, and you see some people kind of get down, but they're looking around. Like whoa, what what's going on? So good observations there. My point here though is that actually Jack had a fairly wide open shot for the most part, right? And but he had a pretty long shot, and I like what you asked. You asked the question, Jacob: am I capable of making a shot like that? Do you even know? So I took the challenge a week or so ago, and I said, you know what? I'm going to create my own Jack Wilson challenge. And, inspired by this, obviously, I'm like, I have to know that I can make a shot like that. All right? Because I want to know. And I'm in situations where that might be the case. So you could set this up a variety of ways. And you could argue, well, what if that shot's at 25 yards instead of 15? Well, whatever. Set up whatever you want. Learn what you are capable of based on a certain set of circumstances. That's what I'm trying to say. And just see what you can do. I decided to set up 15 yards, a 3x5 card representing a relatively small target, like a head, 15 yards. And I thought about it. I'm like, well, I want to make sure I can do this in under 3 seconds. And I decided that I wanted to test myself drawing from my holster with my typical carry gun using my carry ammo. Not my practice ammo, my carry ammo. Is your carry ammo sighted in, do you know where it hits on target based on your point of aim? Do you know that? Based on a certain distance? And so I asked the question. I said, well, in this gun, I'm using a P365 XL, which is my primary carry gun these days. P365 XL, Federal HST 150 grain bullet, hollow point, 15 yards, 3x5 card, under 3 seconds. And I was able to make that shot, and I was able to do it multiple times.
Well, I was going to say those two things. One, make sure you can do it multiple times, right? Me being able to do it once is not necessarily indicative of future success. The second thing is doing it cold. It's one thing to kind of go to the range, warm up, put 100 rounds through the gun, and be like, all right, now I'm going to test myself on this. Yes, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with running tests, but make sure that we understand that this is a situation where Jack Wilson didn't have any warm-up time.
Yep.
This was cold. This was, I don't know when the last time he had shot his gun was, but it wasn't 30 seconds prior. It was probably at least days prior, and he had to make the shot. Yep.
Now, I failed to mention in my so-called published Jack Wilson drill, I said, and it should be probably done cold. Absolutely. Yeah, test yourself in those circumstances. Now, the day I attempted it with my P365 XL, I was not truly cold, but it was the first shot I fired with that gun coming from the holster in that position, because I was doing a little bit of practice before that, but it was my competition gun from a 3 o'clock OWB standoff, holster. So kind of semi-cold in a way. But the next time I go to the range, I'm going to definitely do it like straight up cold with the round that's in the chamber of my gun right now, and I'm going to test myself on that again. So anyway, I think some takeaways there. I think there's a lot of mindset things to consider. I think there's some planning and preparation things to take away from this. I think there's some training considerations, both in terms of just general tactics and security stuff, as well as training that ultimate of skills, being able to draw out that gun and place a precise shot, on demand, and being able to do that consistently. Know what you are capable of. Know what you can do. Don't be taking shots you can't make. Can you imagine how different it would be if somebody here decided they were going to try to be the hero, but in the process accidentally shot an innocent bystander that got in the way? That sort of thing. Muzzle awareness. Be aware where your gun is pointed at all times. Be thinking about that. That's got to become part of the psyche. I mean, your gun handling, it has to be almost automatic, just baked in. That based on a circumstance, you go, this is what I got to do to make sure I'm not muzzling all these other people or myself. Just so many things that we've covered in this episode today. Any last words, Jacob?
No, that's all I had.
Okay.
Got it all off my chest.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've been over an hour here, which is a little bit longer than we typically like to do it, but kind of hard with a subject like this today and so much to talk about. We appreciate all of you for being here with us. Those viewing live, had a good crowd that stuck with us for most of the show here. Good comments taking place on the Facebook and YouTube. And those of you listening at home or in your cars or wherever you are, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And I hope you found value in our breakdown and analysis of this church shooting today. Take something from it and don't have any excuses. Find the next thing that you need to do to be a little bit better prepared and a little bit more willing. All right, that's all I got. A reminder that today's episode is sponsored by LaserX. Head on over to laserapp.com and learn more. Get signed up. All right, you can sign up for monthly access, which is a great way to get started inexpensively. But you might as well just buy the straight up, lifetime access. Because I'll tell you what, I've been using Laser app for I can't remember now, 4 years at least now, and I still use it and I still find value in it. So. And of course, you can check out Cert Pistols and all the other different training tools. They have a number of things on their site at laserapp.com. We also sell stuff at concealedcarry.com, like Cert Pistol. And so, get yourself set up. And this is also something you could set up at home. Setting up a challenging, difficult shot. Yes, there's not recoil involved. It matters, but it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of value and a lot of training you can get out of doing dry fire just right at home. All right, the reps is really key, and then take it to the range and take what you learn at home and put it to work at the range as well. That's the key, is a good balance of good dry fire practice, good consistent reps, and then mix in some really good valuable live fire training as well. That's what I've done. It's made a big difference for me. I know it's made a difference for Jacob. Jacob's a better shooter than he was a few years ago. It's true. All right, so laserapp.com, laserapp.com. And don't forget to check out the Shooter Ready Challenge, shooterreadychallenge.com. And don't forget to go subscribe to our new channel on gunstreamer.com. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and listening. We'll be at SHOT Show next week. It's going to be a busy week. We will not have normal broadcast content. We probably have a few lives here and there throughout the week, I would guess. But don't count on any live podcasts like you're typically used to. But I will get some. I know I'm interviewing Max Michelle and Hannah Bilodeau from Sig Sauer. I love Hannah. She's a great gal, law enforcement officer, and she's a heck of a shooter. Jacob and I were in a class with her at Sig Sauer Academy for part of that anyway. She's a rock star. So I'll be talking with Hannah. I'll be talking with Max Michelle. People will probably look forward to the Max Michelle interview. So there'll be a few interviews that we do there for the podcast. We'll get those published when we can, and look forward to it. And also all the content coming on our YouTube and Gunstreamer channel. We'll be publishing a lot of videos next week. So there you go. That's all I got. Jacob, thanks for doing the show with me today. And thank you to Matthew, even though he had to leave early. But with that, we'll let you go with a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care. Well, folks, on Facebook, thanks so much for being, and YouTube, thanks for being here. Thanks for your comments. You guys are awesome. Rock on. And we'll see you later. All right.